So this particular study looks at grammar and basically looks at how age of arrival to the US might interact with your grammar score. Okay, and what they find is that the later that you arrive to the US, the lower your score often is. And what that shows is that after the age of 10, your grammar score is actually very much lower compared to the native speaker. In fact, uh, you know, between 3 to 7 years of age, your grammar abilities are comparable to one of a native speaker, but then over time, gradually, that score decreases. Okay, so that might actually show that there's something in early childhood, there's something in school-age children um, period of time that might make them more sensitive to learning specific aspects of language. So the question really is, you know, for parents, would you want your child to learn English and one other language or just English starting from birth? Okay, especially if you are coming from an ethnically diverse background. And even not, is that something that you would consider and why or why not? And then kind of by extension, the question is then if you are going to work with kids from a young age and you will have a diverse classroom of students from different ethnic and language backgrounds, how will you work with students who might be bringing in more than one languages to their classroom, and parents who handle that differently, right? Some parents want their kids only to speak English in classrooms, whereas other parents don't have that desire or that, expectation, right? So it's a lot to think about, right? So let me walk you through what scholars actually say about this. As first, I will talk about disadvantages, and then I'll talk about the advantages of speaking more than one language from early on. So what they found was that when you're thinking about bilingualism, and in particular, we're talking here about when children are exposed from birth to two languages, like for example, Spanish and English, right? Um, what they found was that these kids tend to have smaller vocabularies in both languages, English and Spanish, for example, and a slight delay in grammar or syntax compared to those who only speak, for example, one language like English. But by age 8 or so, which is about third grade, there's typically no difference between them and children who speak just one language. Okay, another disadvantage might be that these kids might actually be slower at retrieving individual words from their long-term memories. And that might come out in those tip of the tongue experiences where you can't think of that word. What's that word? I know it in this one language, but not the other, right? Or poor word identification, for example. Okay, so those might be some of the challenges that come with speaking more than one language from birth. But here are the advantages, and I will say that as I have been looking at both advantages and disadvantages, actually there definitely seems to be more of a leaning to promote the advantages of learning more than one language from early on. Okay, there's a lot more research that shows that it's actually positive. Okay, and here are some reasons. Okay, so what they find, for example, here is between monolinguals, which is the dark line, versus bilinguals. Yes, in terms of vocabulary, monolinguals do have a higher vocabulary, but that when you look closely, it's only with reference to certain types of words. So they found that bilinguals tend to have more of a difference or lesser vocabulary when it comes to home words. That makes sense because they are oftentimes at home speaking, for example, Spanish, and then at school they might speak English, and so it makes sense that you'll see maybe a smaller English vocabulary when it comes to words naming foods or naming, family members or, naming, parts of the house, for example. Okay. And then what they find is that basically there are other benefits in that actually bilingual children can recognize a wider range of phonemes or sounds. That actually makes sense, right? Because, for example, when I taught in Korea for a year, I learned that there are certain sounds that are harder for Koreans to pronounce, not because they aren't able to, but because it's not in the Korean alphabet, right? And so they haven't had the exposure to that sound. So for us, what do you call that wonderful deliciousness of the bread, cheese, marinara sauce? Some people like pepperoni on it. We call it pizza, okay? They actually have trouble saying that sound, pizza sound. In fact, they oftentimes feel more comfortable saying pizza instead of pizza. And that's because the ts sound is not in the Korean language, okay? And so when you learn more than one language, you actually become exposed to different types of sound and can actually recognize different types of sound even more. So that's one benefit. Another benefit is a greater sensitivity toward cultural values and speakers of both languages. Languages actually carry culture. You learn about the culture even through language, right? You learn about you know, what types of words and how to actually say and communicate in that language, and what types of words to use in different contexts, right? And you learn a little bit about the person and where they might be coming from when we talk about language, right? And so when we learn different languages, we're exposed to not just language, the words we speak, but also cultural values and getting to know the people behind those languages, right, in a deeper and more meaningful way. Bilinguals tend to have higher levels of metalinguistic awareness. That's understanding kind of the rules, the explicit rules of each language. And this is often linked to greater reading and writing proficiency. And also, another strong benefit is executive functioning. Those who start learning different languages early, tend to have higher executive functioning in order to do, basically, they're able to do tasks that demand more flexible thinking, right? They can inhibit their minds to focus on a certain thing. They can shift mentally from one context to another. And that's probably because they've had to do that with different cultures and different languages. They've had that practice. So let me show you a little bit more about bilingualism. There's actually this infographic that visually demonstrates the benefits of bilingualism, I think, really well here. And this is also based off of research. So this infographic talks about how this speaking two languages is actually great because our world is becoming more and more globalized, right? And it actually affects the brain, right? That bilingual children as young as 7 months can easily adjust to environmental changes, and seniors who are bilingual can experience less cognitive decline. Okay, it's been shown to improve your cognitive skills, help you focus on tasks, um, create denser gray matter, which is responsible for processing language or storing memory and dictating attention spans. And basically, it also helps you switch between tasks, prevent dementia, improved memory, improved decision-making skills. It helps you basically become more aware of language, like, for example, grammar and sentence structure. And basically, it helps them become more effective communicators, editors, writers. Bilingual effects in children, it's related to critical thinking skills and in math and abstract thinking. Um, Also relates to jobs, right? Practically speaking, more and more jobs are preferring people who can speak more than one language, right? Where even pay is higher if you can speak more than one language. So these are all different types of benefits that we're seeing in bilingualism. And as we think about this, I want us to think about now, let's go back to our original topic of serving Hispanic children and families, and this being one aspect that we need to think about in doing that well. I want you to think about this discussion question and respond in the discussion forum, okay? So imagine you're teaching a 4-year-old preschool classroom. One of the new students is a Hispanic female girl named Marisol, who seems shy and mostly speaks in Spanish. How would you approach teaching and interacting with Marisol? And how would you go about supporting her bilingualism and biculturalism? So think about what we talked about. Think about what the text talks about in working with Hispanic children and families. And I want you to thoughtfully, address some of these questions below through the discussion forum. Thank you and see you on Canvas.